Hello, thank you very much for coming to my presentation about my research that I've been doing here. So my name's Emily Wood. I'm senior lecturer at Kingston School for Art, which is part of Kingston University. I teach on graphic design, BA graphic design, and co-run the third year. The research that I've been working on is about a large peer assessment that I did in my old job, which was when I was leading the first year at Central St Martin's on the BA Graphic Communication Design course. University Arts London is made up of 6 London art colleges. And then within those, Central St Martin's is the world famous art and design college, mainly famous for its fashion, although quite famous for graphic design as well. We have been through a recent revalidation of our course, and I think this was the first year that we were introducing a new course to our new first years. And the philosophy behind it is reflecting the practice of a graphic designer in the industry. So we talk a lot about the expanded practice of a graphic designer, and I think it's about going beyond what you might consider a graphic designer to do in terms of just design into a much wider scope of researcher, thinker, practitioner, collaborator. And this is a quote from Adrian Shaughnessy, who teaches at the RCA, about this idea of the expanded practice designer who can encompass many things: researcher, thinker, activist, publisher, innovator, and agent for social change. On the left, I put some pictures of some work from our graduating students last year, again, just so you can see the breadth and variety of work that our students are doing. So the course changed its name from just graphic design to graphic communication design. And this is from the course description to equip students with the creative, conceptual, technical, and meta-level thinking skills expected of designers of the 21st century. And I've just been reading Robot Proof by Joseph Ayon, where he talks about the set of skills that students need to work in the future, possibly alongside robots. And he talks about the skills that make us uniquely human: creativity, empathy, flexibility, and collaboration. And I put this on because I think that actually that's what we've been teaching for a long time, and increasingly focused on these kind of areas. So there's quite a nice future proofing that's going on. So this was a degree show catalogue from a few years ago from the students, and I think there's a very strong ethic in the college and the course that we actually do think that graphic design can change the world. And while we might not be making the laws, we're communicating them. So in some way, we are actually having quite a large, or could have a big impact on social change. So from some conversations I've had with people, I thought it'd be useful just to talk about the language that we use. So talk about the BA in Graphic Communication Design. It's a 3-year undergraduate degree course. It's very linear. You just do the units one after each other. In the first year, you do units 1 to 4. You have to pass all the units to progress into year 2. All the teaching, we teach using what we call design briefs. And the brief outlines the context, references, and schedule for a project. The first unit that I did my research on is a 20-credit unit, which is a small credit unit, but also the students only actually need to pass it to progress into the second year, although a lot of them have much higher expectations. And for this unit, we were just going to set one single brief for these first 5 weeks of term. So the way that we teach graphic design, we use kind of introductory lectures into topics, but then we tend to break out into the studio and we use discussion groups, tutorials. The students present their work a lot. We assess quite frequently by just them handing in their portfolios, and what we call crits, where this is a crit here, where a group of students and a tutor or two will stand around often and discuss the work that's being submitted or work in progress. So at the time I was first year leader, and I think I had this role, amongst other things, of supporting students through their transition from their previous education into higher education. And I found these 4 areas that is a way to support this transition. So we've got their academic, their emotional, their life skills, and supporting them into independent learning to help them succeed at higher education. So this was my year group from 2016. There's quite a lot of them. So they are 150. They're from 31 different countries, quite a lot. Interestingly, only 14% of them are boys. 17% of them are over 21 years old. And it's a very diverse group. 44% are from the UK, 13% from the rest of the EU, and 43% international students. That's pretty standard kind of makeup of a year group. And again, their previous educational experience is really varied. A lot of them have done a foundation year in art and design, some of them at CSM, some of them at different UAL colleges, and some of them from other colleges in the UK or increasingly around the world. I think there's quite a lot of foundation courses starting up. Some of them have come from other types of further education, things like BTEC, some straight from school, and some have had some different path, maybe work or previous degrees before they get there. So Unit 1 is called An Introduction to Graphic Communication Design at Central St Martin's. And the course team decided that we were going to set them a brief to investigate the role of the designer in addressing complex social problems. And we wanted to introduce them to the design thinking methodology, which is a methodology that's been used by quite a few speakers. Tim Brown set up IDEO, the most famous use of it, but I think it's been knocking around for a bit longer than that. So adapted this diagram to try and explain to the students how to use design thinking to tackle social problems. It's about creating a convergent approach to solving problems instead of a divergent approach. So it's about finding loads of things and then reducing them down rather than trying to find a simple solution given the parameters you've got. I won't go into it much more. You can look it up if you're interested. So for this research, I thought that I was going to look at the assessment of this brief. We decided to run as a peer assessment. And because I think that I put can peer assessment, but I believe that peer assessment can support this transition into higher education through these different areas. So the methodology is action research. So this is the research that you use to carry out a particular intervention. Teaching, reflect, plan, action, observe, and you go round again in the circle. And I realized that this was really similar to the design thinking methodology. If you add these two in, it is the same. And these lines and circles are a bit confusing, but they're basically trying to just get the idea that it's not a linear process and that you can take one and go back and go round and round. And I think that's quite similar to action research. So I had the idea for the research, collected data during and after the action, which involved the participants, to inform the next cycle of the action research. So the procedure, it's a 5-week project. The students were put into groups. They had to do a group verbal presentation at the end of it. And they also had to submit 2 pieces of work, a group evaluation form, which was about their immediate group, and a self-reflection form. I tried to do a diagram. I think I might have let myself down as a graphic designer. So I thought it'd be really easy to visualize it. So we've got 150 students I've broken them into 5 groups of 6 groups of 5. It's called them different studio numbers. And then the idea is that each studio group presents to the other studio group. So this is one group, and these groups are going to assess them on the peer assessment. Within the group, every student has to fill in a form about the 4 other members, and they also have to submit a personal reflection. And these 2 are submitted online. So there's a summative assessment at the end of this unit done by the tutors. This is the peer assessment form that I designed for this, and it's got the learning outcomes matched up with the marking criteria. So the idea is the students go through this and they ring, you can't see this, but they ring the appropriate answer for these different marking criteria. It's quite bad actually. And then they hand that in. So each tutor takes that and then adjusts each individual mark according to what the group said about them and what they wrote about themselves, which are on these 2 documents, self-evaluation and a team evaluation. I don't know how much you need to understand that. So, just so this is a timeline of the procedure. There's a briefing, there was a presentation, then the tutors had to do this holistic assessment using the peer assessment. And I've tried to match that up with the data collection points. I did student interviews. I sent out a, well, the university sends out a unit evaluation survey, which is this one here. I did some more student interviews. I sent out a questionnaire just about the peer assessments, because this was about the whole unit. And then I also followed it up in October with some of my students who'd moved into the 2nd year to ask them about what they thought about it a year on. Okay, so that's my data collection. Oh, plus the students obviously handed in their self-reflections, where sometimes they reference the peer assessment or some aspect of it, and sometimes they also, on the group evaluation form, they talked about how the group had worked together. So back to those points, increasing assessment literacy. So the online questionnaire asked them, did it help you understand how you were going to be assessed at CSM? And they overwhelmingly said yes, although about a quarter said they didn't help them or they weren't sure. The unit evaluation asked them, gave them a statement, I understood the assessment criteria. They mostly agreed. I think people tend not to strongly agree with things, but anyway. But there's still some down here which need unpicking, I think, and looking at. Even the middle bar is a bit too big. Student interviews. So these are some quotes I pulled out. I think seeing the inner workings of how the marking system works is important, especially while answering a brief. There was quite a few comments about the language. I didn't understand the language of the learning outcomes. However, now I think it's okay. Now I think the marking criteria should be open enough to question what is researched. So this was from a 2nd year student who had struggled the year before. And when I spoke to him again, he'd kind of accepted it and maybe understood it a bit more. From a staff interview, they mentioned that people coming from different backgrounds, different education systems. And again, the language around the outcomes. So to pull the discussion into this part, I thought that some of this was quite expected. They showed a really good understanding, and many of them showed a really good understanding of why they were doing it. In fact, they were quite impressed with some of the things they said and wrote. There were lots of comments around the language and marking criteria and academic assessment, even things like formative assessment, summative assessment, feedback against assessment. I realised some of these words were being interchanged quite a lot. So quite a lot of them didn't think that it helped them understand how they were going to be assessed, which was a bit disappointing, really, considering I just spent 5 weeks doing it with them. So in terms of learnings, I think that I did a big year briefing, but I think I could have done another workshop to pin in on exactly why we were doing it, and also how understanding how they're going to mark is going to help them with their work. So I think that's the link that they need to understand why they need to understand it. The thing about the language used is ongoing, and actually I think that UAL are doing they're looking into it at the moment, and they're thinking of trying to rewrite that. It's obviously something that's happened a lot in different places, and it's quite difficult. But I think, bearing in mind, about 45% of our students are learning in a second language, I think it's something that we do need to address. So in terms of collaboration skills, how did you find the peer assessment with your group? Well, the majority of them thought that it was either straightforward or mostly okay. So that was 95%. So that was great. Unit evaluation. This 5-week project enabled the group to come up with a creative solution via problem solving and thinking. I like this quote because it talks about the diversity of the group and how they understood that you can actually have more using this diversity rather than thinking it as a problem. Some students got the idea of collaboration. They know they've got to turn up, be on time, work hard. One student said he found it intimidating because they didn't know each other. We were complete strangers. And they also did have issues with not full attendance all the time. One of my colleagues talked about self-efficacy, which I thought was really interesting, and about this idea of your perception of yourself against your peers. And I think that would be a really good point to bring up with the students next time we ran it. This came in one of the self-reflections that I received. A student said, "I've never done a group project before. This project was enjoyable and struggled at the same time. Most challenging parts was speak out my opinion and talk to our group." And this student wrote a really long self-reflection about how difficult she found it. And I know that she actually had quite a lot of help from the language support tutor who helped her understand what a self-reflection was as well. But it was very insightful into the difficulty. She'd never done a group project before. So most of the teams were pretty good. They had their ups and downs, but they worked really well. I think 2 of the teams broke up into 2 separate groups, and a few of the students went AWOL, but I think 2 students disappeared during it. So I think that's probably an expected outcome. And in fact, not expected, I expected more problems with the teams because when they go into second year, they do a group project and there's more problems. But I think that being in the first year and in a really new, difficult situation actually made the teams work better, perhaps, than they might do in the second year. So I think we did do quite a lot of work around how to work in a team and the theory of teams. But I'd like to link in this idea of employability and the fact that they're going to be moving into a place where they're always going to be working in teams. So around increased engagement and deeper learning, I asked them, why do you think we asked you to assess your peers? And I gave them an open answer question. The majority, or the most answers, there's only 11, said learn to give feedback to each other. So that's great. And then understanding the marking matrix was the next answer, which was great. Go on to the next one. The unit evaluation asked them if the unit challenged them to develop their thinking. Okay, so this was the whole unit, not just the peer assessment, but I think that it was challenging, and it did challenge them, so that's a positive. These some quotes. Assessing someone else helps your learning and helps your understanding of what you're doing yourself, which I think is exactly the purpose of the peer assessment. And the negatives, the tutor handed the marking criteria out to us and started to explain them to us. I switched off. And then this did come up quite a lot. I think that getting feedback from other students is very valuable. However, I'm not sure if this should count towards our official grade. So this idea of they're really up for having feedback, but they're very nervous about the grading, and I'd really like to push that a bit further, because I would like the peer grade to be their final grade, and help them to unpick why they think that shouldn't be the official mark. The staff said that it was useful because they were able to quickly identify the students who needed additional help. And I think this idea about the briefing of it, so some students still didn't pick it up. And again, I think that's where our diverse student body comes in. We've got different issues with different students. Sometimes it's language, sometimes it's cultural, sometimes it's some kind of cognitive understanding of what's going on. So again, I think that's something that we could work a lot harder on. Increased engagement. They understood how the marking matrix supports the design process. I think that's really important, and I thought that their answers were really eloquent around that. So not expected about how they didn't like their peers marking their work, but also something about this was a good comment about how giving feedback to students helps them develop their own practice. So obviously that's a really good positive, but I wasn't expecting them to be actually that aware of what they were doing. And then there were the comments about students they thought there was too much personal opinion coming through. So, and I think this idea of showing them the marking matrix is meant to explain to them that it's not about personal opinion, that we have a criteria that we mark to, and it's not some kind of subjective grade that we pull out of the air. I think this probably carries on into second and third year, and thinking about how this embeds through the course and not maybe just on this one experiment. Okay, so empowering students to become independent learners. Do you think this understanding of assessment will help you for the rest of this course? Some of them said not sure or no, 18%. I can't imagine why they said that, but anyway. Unit evaluation, how did this unit challenge your thinking? It has a long answer. So I think this demonstrates that they are getting the idea of the new approach to university. I like the hands-off, which that's because I think that they weren't taught enough, was greatly beneficial to me in developing into a more independent designer. But they did realise that help and guidance was available. So the students said that the matrix helps them, that quite a few of them understood that it gave them a start and an end point for a project. I asked one student about whether he felt empowered by understanding this, and he said, it's a type of empowerment for us, not the best one. I felt like if I could mark someone, it would be a real mark. I felt it was something that would impact. I didn't find enjoyment in having the power to determine someone's grade. It was quite stressful. However, the staff fully agreed that it did make them feel more in control of their work, and it also gave them a language to be able to give feedback to each other. So rather than saying it's nice or I like it, they could talk about the communication aims. So the expected answers are the relationship between the marking matrix and their work. I like this, she said, if I'm lost in this total flunk, I can see like how to maneuver to the next step. And this idea about giving each other constructive feedback and how to do that. So I wasn't expecting it to be stressful for the students. And again, that's not really something that I'd want, and I suppose just like further support. But it was interesting to find out because it didn't come through on any of the surveys, it just came through an interview. So to really find out if they have become independent learners, it goes into the second and third year students, and also thinking about how we run the peer assessment next year. Oh, and for further assessments through the course. And finally, we talked about building a community. So should other students be involved with your assessment, or do you think it's something only tutors should do? Well, a lot of them thought that it was fine to be, they were happy to be assessed by their peers, but that's the blue. But a lot of them thought that it wasn't. And I think that's something that even through this whole process, I was quite surprised at that it was so many. What changes, if any, would you make to improve this unit for other students in the future?
Recordamos que está prohibido entrar con comida o bebida en la biblioteca.
I really like this comment about meeting people from different cultural backgrounds, because I put the students into groups before they arrived, and all I had to go on was their nationality and their gender. So I just tried to spread them out amongst the groups. So every group had a very intercultural mix of students. And I think that while they were forced into these groups, I think it did work really well, and most of the groups seemed to really support each other. They made friends with their group members, and a lot of them talked about how they're still their friends. Okay, so yeah, I like this comment. Second year student said, "Now I've understood what you meant about learning from the people around you. If you want to improve, you have to speak to your peers." So one of my favourite things when students further on, or graduated students, come back and repeat things that you've told them they've remembered. The staff said, "I don't think it broke any friendships. That it could, there could have been disagreement, but it's something we want the students to learn." I'm standing in the way. There's something about putting a group of students through a shared difficult experience in terms of bringing them together. They struggled as a group during the project and during the assessment, but mainly came out strong friends. And I think that was the overall feeling, that they found parts of it, they all found parts of it challenging, but they managed to overcome those challenges through the project. And this same student who did the self-reflection before said, "Thank you for our group members, take care of me." So there was lots of positive comments about building a community. I wasn't expecting that they would have such a kind of overall understanding of why we were running the project, i.e. in terms of helping the first year to build a new community, and also the way that the peer assessment was going to support that. I think that it would be great if we could implement some of their community building ideas, and I think this would show them a commitment from the university to their work. So I thought I'd show you some. So on the left, this is a project called Feast Friday, and the idea is that one Friday a month, students bring in some food from their country or their culture, and they all have lunch together, and it's still running actually. The one on the right is called Pop-Up Portraits, and they sat down in the street in the middle of the college, and in between them, you can't quite see the board, so they can't see each other. So someone's describing herself, and the other one's drawing her without seeing her. So it was a really interesting way of getting to meet people. This idea was to put this ball pit right in the middle of college, which we all just thought was a really silly and childish idea, but it was really popular. The students loved it. It was all over social media. And so just went to show that I was not the target audience for that. And then this bottom right idea, really nice idea about putting different sources from cultural backgrounds into the canteen and marking them with a little label of where they're from, what you could put them with. So an idea that students can introduce people to their food, their culture, but just through the sauce that they add onto their food. So the issues that came up, my role, I was their first year, head of first year, and I was a group tutor, so that probably did impact on what they said to me, how they behaved, even in the interviews, although the last interviews I had left, so I don't know if that was made them a bit more open. They're quite open actually and quite ready to say what they think, so I'm not sure if that had a big impact. I think if I did it again, I'd tweak my questions. I'd like to have a bit more, I'd like to be able to know which students said what on my questionnaire so that I could match up their backgrounds with their answers. I think something else that I didn't really look at was the increase in workload for the staff. I think there is an increase in workload, but you have to think of it as kind of front loading, and that hopefully it decreases the workload as you go through the course. I also think there are some really good digital tools which could work, but they need the buy-in from the university. And again, just being able to find some more students who didn't put themselves forward or weren't there to speak or didn't fill in the survey, I think could broaden my research. So I think as we move into a place where we've got students from increasingly different backgrounds, student numbers are going up, we're having more of what we call widening participation, so students from different backgrounds coming into universities at different levels in their education and having had very different educational experiences. I think that it's a really good way to show students, help students through this transition. I think the success of it has a lot to do with how you brief the students. And in fact, I think on the year that I did it, I think I'd like to have given them more support after the lectures. I delivered a lot of the information in big lectures, and I think that's a really difficult way for some of our students, especially who are very visual, tactile learners, to take in information. So it would have been nice to follow it up with some smaller workshops. So in answer to my question, I think I have demonstrated that it does support students into their transition into higher education. And I actually think it's a really excellent way to support them. That's my summary. So I'd like it to be, oh yes, that's on my notes. I'd like it to be rolled out across all the first year, all Unit 1, across the different courses, because I think then you start to build in assessment as quite a rigorous process right from the beginning. And I think it's difficult, but I still think it's really worthwhile in terms of the benefits to the students. So that's it. Thank you to all the students who took part. My course colleagues, especially all the hourly paid associate lecturers who trusted me and supported me and did it with me. To Kingston School of Art for supporting my research and this trip, and for the Tuning Academy for having me.